This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with Texas-based artist Tom Orr about his artistic journey. Orr is an artist whose large-scale sculptures have been widely collected in the US and Japan, and who is a frequent collaborator with episode 23 guest Frances Bagley, who happens to be his wife. At the end of the episode, I'll be taking a look at some of the week's top art headlines. But first up, The Path of an Artist with Tom Orr. Hey, Tom, I appreciate you sitting down with me. Did you grow up in Texas?
I grew up in Dallas, Texas, as a matter of fact, in Dallas and Lubbock and Garland.
Okay.
Which, it was Oak Cliff, Lubbock, and Garland.
Right.
Which I like to say are the three hot spots of Texas, back
so
then.
Some are hotter than others.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I'm born and raised in Dallas. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I got to tell you. But
so did you grow up in an artistic home or like?
Not really. My dad was worked for Mayflower Warehouses, which was his father's company, and my mom was sort of a housewife. This is in the 50s, so she did do this painting of photographs. She'd tint photographs, which a lot of women did back then.
Yeah.
Again, there weren't any like producing artists or practicing artists in my household. One thing though, my mom always took us to the museum, and my brother wouldn't go, but she would always take me to the museum.
Right.
And she made a big point of that. So it was always stressed that art was important, Right. And it wasn't, sometimes I hate to even talk about these things, but it's like, being raised a male in Texas, you've got this, by God, you got to be a football player and that, which is good. Don't get me wrong. Sports are fine.
Right.
But sometimes that emphasis is a lot more than, you should also go to a museum. You should do these things. And both my parents made that kind of important things in our lives, my brother and me.
So what museums would you have been going to back
then? At
then?
the time, since this was 50s in Dallas, It was the Dallas Museum, the one at Fair Park.
Right.
Which, Fair Park, yeah, that's where it was, yeah. And that's where we'd go, and there's, as a matter of fact, in the first grade, you have school day at the state fair, and we went to state fair, and the teacher said, okay, we get back to school, and everybody draws something they saw at the fair. So we had they took us through the museum because they were doing this Indian sand painting or something. Right. And also there was a, God, I can't remember his name now. One of those painters that did stripe paintings. I forget. I'll think of it in a minute.
Yeah, that's all right.
But I saw his painting. That's great to see stripes, And so we get back to school, and people are drawing big texts in the midway, and their first grade version of that anyway. And I thought, I'm going to make a copy of that painting. So I did these stripes, on a page, and the teacher says, Tom, what is this?
Right.
I said, well, it's what I saw at the fair. And she goes, no. Just, she didn't tear it up, but she said, no, you got to draw something you saw at the fair. I said, I saw this painting in the museum. This is what I want to do. She said, well, no, we need something you really saw at the fair, like big text or whatever. So it's like, sure. I like to say it's my first bad critique of a piece of work.
Yeah, but it's so funny. I have I'll sit here and have conversations with someone, and they'll tell a story like that, and like I'm looking over their shoulder at these prints that you've done that are stripes. Right. Sometimes we can't run away from these things that make an impression on us.
I've got things I'm doing right now that I remember seeing when I was 6 or 7 years old. I mean, it stays with you constantly, and you can act on them, or you can just think about them, or you can turn them into your work, And I've not just stripes, but that's something you just saw there, I guess. But that when another thing is, when I was a kid, my brother and I shared a bedroom, and everybody had Venetian blinds back then. So you got these horizontal stripes on your windows. And if you turn them a little bit, you'll get these beautiful lines of light, on the ceiling. Well, our next door neighbor back in the 50s repaired TV sets, and TV was just a new thing. And he had a color TV set, which is even newer. No one had them. So he'd be tinkering with this stuff in his shop at night. And, of course, we had to go to bed at 8 or 9, whatever. And I can remember being in the bed, looking at these beautiful colored stripes on the ceiling that, did this and this according to how it hit the room, changing colors. And I thought, that is the greatest looking thing, And that still stays with me to this day. The second thing I remember looking at was the Venetian blinds with the cord hanging in front of it, which made that moire pattern, made that dotted line. And I thought that, I'd bat the thing and you'd see this dotted line change. And that's something I'm using all the time now, but it's something I saw when I was very, very young. And of course, then you just think it's kind of cool and different looking. Why is that happening?
Right.
But then when you get older and you think, maybe I could make this and make it do something that's, different than just a natural thing that happens, and a lot of people have done that. I'm not the only one that's, but those things are very important to me, and I still use them all the time.
But you're open to inspiration. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, you were. So it sounds like you're at least a really visual kid. Like things,
pretty much.
Visual things made a big impact on you. It sounds like
they did, and I always go back to my brother because I always wonder why my brother, he is. I mean, he's everybody's visual. I mean, he sees things. But he chose to go another route, and I'm always curious about that because he did show me some things when I was young, visual things that are very, very important, and he didn't choose to act on those for some reason. I mean, wonderful guy, great life, I went one way, he went the other, and it's not like we split up. It's just, it's a good question. I don't know why that happened,
Yeah.
What my brother showed me as a young kid, he said, if you draw a box and then you draw another box and you overlap them and then connect the lines, you get this three-dimensional cube. God, I remember going, that is brilliant,
Right.
And so then he also showed me you could take that and you could make like a 3D drawing and put a roof on it, be like a barn or something, I was like flabbergasted by that, and anyway, I'll tell you one more story about this. This is
we're here for stories.
Okay, this is in the first grade. This same teacher that didn't like my stripe drawing from the fair. We're drawing barnyard scenes one day, and I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make one of those barns my brother showed me how to do. So, I do it and made the roof and and put like a window in it and did that like the same way, like 3D. And so the teacher comes by and goes, oh my God, she said, this is fantastic. She said, how did you learn to do this? I just figured it out, And she said, you take this down there right now and go to that 5th grade art teacher's room and show her this drawing, And I said, okay, and I thought, oh shit, man, that's where, that's the 5th graders in that room. I don't know if I want to go in there or not. I was real embarrassed to do this, So I went and stood in the bathroom for like 30 minutes with my drawing, and I thought, I can't go in there. It's just like my brother may be in there and all this stuff, and I just, kind of shy. And so I go back to the teacher, and she said, what'd she say? And I said, she liked it. And I said, what do you do? Kids, Jesus.
I mean, that's one of those moments, you still remember it, where someone says, I'm good at something, and all of a sudden it's like been branded on your identity. Right. Yeah,
and that might have been the first sign right there, point or indication that I had that something was going on with me that other people maybe didn't have or whatever. And so, at that point, I could always draw. I could fairly realistically, even young. And then I also like to make things. So that was, you tie those together. And I again, being raised in Texas as a guy, you got all these other. So I played a lot of sports and stuff, but that was something I always. This is odd to say. I always kind of knew that's what I would be, because I found it a lot more interesting than anything else that was offered out there. Like, don't you want to be a scientist? Well, yeah, but not really. So, I think that kind of got it going, and. And it's being raised in a different generation, and actually being, in high school in the 60s, and, things were changing like so quick and stuff. It was interesting time to want to be an artist,
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of things, even though it's like today, I think there's a lot of things young artists get that we wouldn't possibly ever get, but we were offered a lot more things than the previous generation,
Right.
So it was a good time to get going as an artist,
So did you go straight to art school out of?
No. I graduated.
So what was the path like?
Oh, this is cool. You'll like this. Garland High School, right? I mean, I swear to God, all I wanted to do was get out of Texas, man.
Right.
And it was 68, and everything was a lot of fun.
Well,
and,
and the world was on fire.
World was on fire, and I was draft age, and I knew I didn't want to go to Vietnam, and so everybody was going to college for deferments and all that stuff. So, and I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. My brother went to Tech. I knew I didn't want to do that and do a fraternity thing. I had no interest
Right.
in any of that stuff. So I thought, well, they got this new thing, El Centro, these junior colleges, man.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try that. It's Dallas, and my folks had a rent house in Oak Cliff that I could use,
Mm-hmm.
So sure. So I went to El Centro, and that was another good thing that happened to me, because at El Centro, I met 3 or 4 instructors there who, were fairly new instructors at the time. Robin Koch, you might know one of them.
Yeah.
Remember Robin?
Yeah, I do.
He was there, and he was one of my main inspirations. He was the nicest, gentlest. He is. He's
Right.
the gentlest guy, wonderful artist, and he did some artwork at the time that was very, very popular, and he used kind of plexiglass, milk plex with color pushed up against it, where you just got a glimmer of this color behind something else. So these very subtle changes, light changes and things. And I thought, God, that is great,
Mm-hmm.
And I never really wanted to copy what he was doing, but I always thought, I want my work to have that feel, something that's,
Right.
it's there, but it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that you probably wouldn't notice, but you really should notice it, because it's more important than anything else around it, Anyway, he was a big inspiration. Plus, he went to Rhode Island School of Design, and he said to me one day, and I took a lot of life drawing, all kinds of design classes, everything,
Mm-hmm.
But he said, do you ever think about leaving Texas? I said, oh man, all the time. He goes, well, do you think about going to art school? I said, yep. And so he said, well, you ought to try RISD. And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I looked at a lot of places, and he actually administered the test. They give you a test, and he
Right.
administered it to me in the library there at El Centro, and sure enough, I got in. And it was Kansas City, and I want to say Pratt. I don't know. One place in New York I didn't get in, but I did get in Kansas City and RISD. And I thought, let's go to RISD,
Right.
man. Back then, RISD was RISD. It wasn't like it's kind of a big deal, I think, nowadays. But
Right.
I got in there, and I thought that'd be better than Kansas City, And so I was glad I did that. But El Centro is the place I went first, and I met a lot of good instructors there. And at that point, I realized, even though I'm getting this background in drawing and life drawing and design and all that, the whole fine arts thing may be real important here, At the tail end of my time at El Centro, I got a job working for the Janie C. Lee Gallery in Dallas. Do you know about Janie C. Lee Gallery?
I'm not sure I do.
I think it opened in 68 or 60, I think 68. It was open till like 74 or maybe no, till 76 or something like that, maybe
Okay.
78. But she only showed blue chip artists from New York and LA.
Oh, wow.
And it was an amazing thing for Dallas, because she was selling artwork, but she was also bringing these people down that some of the collectors didn't know much about around, because it was
Right.
it was kind of a new thing then. And I got to work with Linda Binglis, and I'm sure you don't remember Alan Shields, but man, he was a big thing back then. Larry Bell, and Dan Flavin was supposed to do a show there, and
Oh, wow.
he canceled at the last minute because Janie was going to get married, and that fell apart. But anyway, that was very important for me too, because I got to deal with like real important artists as their kind of gallery helper for 2 weeks or whatever. And
Sure. You're the guy that got to pick him up at the airport.
pick them up at the airport, drive them around, do all kinds of stuff with them. And I'd say there was only like one incident the whole time where someone was a real jerk, Right. Won't name the artist, but everybody else was fantastic, and I still talk to Linda Binglis. So it's great. That was wonderful for me before I went to art school, because then I go to art school and there it's like everybody is an artist. I mean, they think they're an artist anyway.
Right.
And I'd actually had this little bit of contact with like real people who were important at the time and still are, and it kind of grounded me a little bit. I didn't like say, I'm going to be a fantastic, that kind of stuff.
Right.
I just said, this is something I could do,
Right.
And so
you had some context.
Yeah, exactly. And I knew they were regular people, even though they were superstars. They were just, they still ate lunch, and they sat around.
Right.
Yeah, it was very good, and Robin helped me get George Green, who was another artist around at that time, an instructor. He's the one that helped me get the job with Janie Sue Lee.
Sure.
Look her up sometime. It was a very important gallery for Dallas at the time,
Yeah.
And
so was El Centro where it is now back then?
Downtown, yeah.
Yeah.
Which was also cool, because I lived in Oak Cliff, and I'd go to El Centro, and back then downtown Dallas was kind of cool because they had bars and thrift shops and stuff right downtown.
So you go to RISD. It's funny, I read an article recently where they were trying to monetize the value of art educations, right?
Yeah.
And they were trying to figure out, is an MFA worth it? And they were saying, well, if you get an MFA at one of these 2 or 3 programs, you'll probably have a chance of making your money back, but it kind of drops off.
Sure.
But they were saying that the BFA from RISD was as valuable as an MFA from some of the big programs in terms of like who's come out of the BFA programs at RISD and what they've been able to do with that.
That's really interesting, because that's something Frances and I talk about a lot, because I don't have a MFA. I got a BFA from Rhode Island School of Design, and you're expected to go get an MFA, and I didn't,
Right.
And in some ways I think it might have been a little bit of a problem for me because of when I did go to RISD, and but it was good. I took so many things at RISD that I probably wouldn't have taken if I just had been doing it on my own or something. It was structured. The studio space was it was horrible. As a sculpture studio, there was none. It was nothing.
Right.
I think that's changed now, but so we all got places off campus where we'd have a studio.
So did they try to make you an illustrator there?
Oh God, no. But I did, and I transferred, and this is interesting. A lot of my stuff transferred from El Centro. I think I had to take English and some other stuff, a couple art history classes, I think,
right,
at RISD, but that was it. And then it was all studio stuff, and so you go to this pretty crazy deal called called summer session, where all the transfer students go spend the summer in the dorm at RISD, which is it's like some of these people had never been out of their hometown, and it was like this really weird assortment of people who were the best artists from their schools. Now they're in RISD, and they're all put them in this room for 6 weeks.
Sounds like Lord of the Flies.
Oh, it was a mess, man. And people were freaking out every day, and I don't have to draw. I've never drawn in my life. That kind of shit,
Right.
It was, and some of those people that I met at Somerset, I'm still friends with. So it was cool.
That's really interesting, because I've heard similar stories about high achieving kids going to places like MIT.
Yeah.
And everyone that goes to MIT was a valedictorian.
Sure.
You leave home thinking, I've got the biggest brain. This is who I am. And they get up there and you're just another guy. A lot of them struggle with not being, not being the head of the class.
A lot of people that went through that summer session and couldn't, and had so much trouble with that, they didn't go back. They just couldn't do it, or they flunked out or whatever. Some people who were the best in their class, and I thought I probably was, it worked just the opposite of me. It made me even more determined to be around these other people who were like the best people, they thought, and you kind of think, yeah, but I can do this too, and blah blah. It made me more determined than ever to be amongst those people, the other transfer students,
Right.
And then some people who came in and wouldn't, I remember this one woman who was just, God, she was just painfully shy, and she could draw everything and could not wrap her head around any kind of conceptual ideas. We even had like this conceptual kind of class she had. And I thought, oh, poor thing, and then, God, she did great, man. She went on and did all these things. She's a wonderful painter now. I mean, it's just
awesome.
It made her do the same thing that happened to me. She just said, oh, this is great, It was a good deal. Art school, for me, was a very good thing. And, getting out of Texas and moving someplace, goddamn Rhode Island, Jesus, it's like very small,
Right.
But I had a lot of good friends, and they had this thing called winter session, which I think they might have that at most schools. I don't know.
Right.
But I always took photography because they had Harry Callahan taught there,
Right.
Aaron Siskin taught there, and so you'd take these winter session classes, with these guys who were like hugely famous, and of course they were older, and they'd had a long teaching career and a wonderful photography careers, and they were just there to like we're doing, talk to people and show people how to do things, and this is all way before digital, and but man, that was great. And I used to go to this one bar in Providence, which was like really rough, and a few other guys would go there or whatever. Man's bar too, no women allowed. That was bizarre. But Harry Callahan and Aaron Siskin both used to go in there in the mornings and drink coffee and shoot. I think Aaron Siskin, I don't know, one of them would shoot pool or something. But, it's just this. They were kind of regular guys. It's just the greatest. That was so cool. And, Paul Crott, who's dead, he was another one that was really big in the photography department. Anyway, that was a wonderful thing about RISD, and I got a hell of a lot out of it. I probably could have taken more, kind of like instructional kind of classes and learned a little more, but I kind of had this vision of things like the more conceptual kind of work was kind of what I was thinking about. And so for my senior show at RISD, which they would give you as a senior sculpture student, everybody got to have a senior show. It's great. And of course you'd have to like 4 people, but they had this the Woods Gary Mansion was the place you'd have it, and it was a mansion up on the hill, but the downstairs was all these rooms you could have exhibitions in, and so my entire senior show was all made of shadows and scrim with spray painted lines on it, and a piece of floating plate glass that had like a kind of a structure underneath it that you couldn't see. It was 3 pieces. I thought it was brilliant, and in fact my critiques were good, but I mean, still, even though it was RISD, this kind of stuff was like, I mean, people still went to RISD at that point to learn how to carve wood and things, and which, nothing against that, but I remember being a little shocked when I got there, because I thought, man, everybody's going to be into like conceptual things and real experimental work, and man, I got there and it was a lot of traditional things going on. Again, there's nothing wrong with that in a school, but I was expecting something a little different, and so what I basically did my whole time there was, like I told you earlier, we got a loft down on Pine Street, this painter friend and I, and we just had a great big studio where we'd invite people over to look at these installations and things that we'd done, So we did it kind of a different way. Even though we were at RISD, we would sort of go there and take our classes and stuff, but we did a lot of stuff out of RISD because of the studio space,
Got it. And so when you finished up, were you drawn to New York, or? Boy,
that's a sad story. Not sad, but that was what you did.
Well, I mean, it's how it typically works, right? I mean, you go to school. There's a critical mass of classmates that are saying we're going. Like, hey, we can split the rent on an apartment 8 ways.
And that was it. And this is 1973 too, so you could go and 5 or 4 people lease a place downtown, and you could do it. I mean, it was expensive, but it wasn't unreal. And so sure, there was 3 or 4 of us that were going to do that, and we had it planned, and I said, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to Texas for the summer and get some money saved up, and then I'm going to come back. Well, shit, that never happened. I mean, I'd get down to Texas, and get with my old friends and stuff and try to do artwork, and it's not working, and it's just, pulling my hair out. And then I realized, Christ, I'm never going to be able to get back up there. And of course, after 6 months, everybody's starting to do other stuff. Plus, I only had a BFA, so a lot of my buddies had gone off to grad school and stuff. So it's like, shit, what do I do now? And so I actually continued to do artwork sort of on my own in one room of my house, and pretty miserable. And finally I thought, this is not working. So some friends I went to high school with said, hey, we got the construction business down in Austin, let's all move to Austin and build houses. And I thought, why not? And at that time they're paying good money, and I was like real strong and tough guy back then. So I moved down to Austin and built houses for a year, and I got to tell you, it was great because I could always make stuff, but I kind of figured I'm actually really building things. I mean, we went out and built like these 3-story houses, out by the lake, and it was like, Christ, this is great, because as a sculptor, I'd never built anything like that. Right. And then the greatest thing too is, when you frame a house, we were framers, you frame a house. There's one point where there's nothing on there, but there's no siding or anything. So you got this beautiful skeleton with all these shadows stuff. And I remember telling the guy I worked with, I said, man, if you could just leave part of the house like this would be fantastic, wouldn't it? And he goes, you're absolutely nuts, man. What's wrong with you? And then I realized, okay, I'm an artist working with these carpenters, so there's got to be a different thing going on here. I guess I left something out of this, one part of this, that getting out of RISD and moving back to Texas and not really knowing what to do. Another instructor of mine said, you might want to apply at SMU to grad school. You ever think about going to grad school? And I was kind of going, what am I doing, And I thought, well, not really, but why not? And he said, well, do this. So I put in, I applied for grad school at SMU, and at the last minute some things happened, and I kind of got crossways with someone at SMU, and I thought, I don't want to teach. I don't especially want to be in academia for another 2 years or whatever. What in the hell are you doing, man? You're going to, if you get in, you're going to be taking up a space where, someone who wants to teach or go on to, it's their space, Right. So I wrote a letter. I wrote a letter and mailed it because there was no, Instagram or anything like that. And that very afternoon, this undergraduate calls me and says, hey, Tom. I said, yeah. He said, they're showing the graduate slides of people who applied, and they just said you got into grad school. And I went, oh, shit. And it was like, remember that show I Love Lucy, where she was like, oh my God, and like running to the post office to get something. So I thought, the hell with it. So actually I got accepted, and then I said, please withdraw my name. It was accepted and withdrew at the same moment. So I didn't go, which was good for me at the time, and went down and built houses, and then came back and thought, what am I doing? I did that for a year, and I came back and went, oh my God, I'm with these carpenters all the time, and they're always talking about sports, and I don't know anything about it.
So at that point, did you think, hey, I've got enough money from building houses that maybe now I should go to New York, or you're like, did you decide?
That would have been a smart thing to do, but I thought, I've got some money, and Austin's not working out for me, and I really need to do some artwork again. So I thought, and I was drawing and doing all kinds of stuff, but nothing was happening. And so I thought, well, I can always go back to Dallas, and then my folks have this rent house I can live in, which I did, and that sort of worked out. And then it did work out to the point that I met some local artists in Dallas who I hadn't known at El Centro, some different people, and some things were going on, and everybody hung out at the Stoneleigh P, the old Stoneleigh P before it burned, or Knox Street Pub. And so there was a group of artists that hung around bars and were doing legitimate work, and photographers and things, that there was a community going, and I thought, this is pretty cool. And so the whole thing about grad school kind of went this way, and moving to New York would have been great at the time. But I thought, let me do this, and again, maybe putting it off or something. And, we I stayed here and tried to get in shows and stuff. And then a few of us got together and said, let's open an alternative space. And we opened 500X. It was actually called 500 Gallery or something back then.
Right.
So we started that. We built it and started that as a gallery. Alternative space where you could do anything you wanted, you know.
Right.
And when we opened it at the time, we were sort of like the, what's the politically correct way to put this? We were kind of the odd one out or whatever.
Yeah.
It was like, well, you know, it's not really a gallery. You know, everybody pays dues, so they're sort of like paying their dues, and then they're putting their own artwork up. So, you know, it's kind of like this vanity thing, you know. And might have been, but what else? There's no other place to show your work. There weren't galleries in Dallas snooping around trying to find you. There was like 500X. There was, I can't even name Courtney Sale maybe was still open then. Janie was gone. There weren't really that many commercial galleries around. DW Co-op was the other one, you know, which was a co-op, so it wasn't really a commercial. I mean, it became a commercial gallery, I guess. But I just did it because I was dying to do bigger sort of installation kind of work or very minimal kind of things, and doing like stuff I'd been experimenting with in a room to do it there, you know. Take that whole downstairs area and do something with it, that pit area. And it was like, God, it was great, you know. And you could do whatever you wanted. I mean, you could make a total fool of yourself if you wanted to, you know. I didn't especially want to do that, but I mean, you could, and it was all right, you know.
Right.
Not that they tried to have foolish things, but you know, you could go there and fail basically, and it was, if you failed, you know, maybe you learned something from it, you know. It wasn't like, oh, I'm not going to be able to sell anything, and the whole selling artwork to me had nothing to do with anything at that point in my career, you know. It was like just make these things happen, you know.
Were you able to do art full time at that point, or did you have a straight gig?
Oh God, no. No, God, I was oh shit, no. My father and uncle had a thing called Orr Reed Wrecking Company, which was always there, and they wrecked houses, and they took all the materials, and they had a wonderful salvage yard, and I could always work there. They paid absolutely nothing. You know?
Would they give you a deal on materials?
Oh yeah.
5-finger discount?
Well, it was sort of like, I need to take this home with me to do so. Okay, sure, go ahead.
Right.
But, you know, I couldn't make a living working there because it just, you know, they didn't pay enough. And they couldn't pay me anymore because I was part of the family. That was their rule. So I'd always work for them, or I'd take a carpentry job.
Right.
And, you know, and then I also had a job as a caterer to make ends meet. It was, you know, and again, it wasn't like I was trying to make money off my artwork because I thought that was pointless. Who's going to buy some scrim with lines painted on it? I mean, you know, you had to be logical about it back then. Maybe they still won't buy that, but I mean, that's what I wanted to do. So to do that, I worked 2 to 3 jobs, which I wasn't the only one. A lot of other people did too. Yeah.
So when did things change?
You ready for all this?
I've got time.
Okay. That was 500, and that was a great thing for me. You know, of course, as a young guy, I want things to happen a little faster. So, what the hell's going on? What am I going to do? Well, so this isn't working. So, a friend of mine, we opened a restaurant in Georgia. So I left Dallas at that point. Boom, I moved to Georgia to open.
There was an unexpected turn in the story that I wasn't.
It'll go quickly from here.
You know, your wife's story had an unexpected turn to Georgia.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So this is a painter in Dallas. His ex-wife and I had a relationship for a while. Her brother bankrolled this restaurant in St. Simon's Island, Georgia. I had worked for a caterer, so I could cook, and so she said, "Come on, we'll do this," you know. And so I went to Georgia for 3 years and left what career I had in Dallas, as small as it was.
Right.
Left that and said, "I go to Georgia." So I went to Georgia and did it for 3 years, and the restaurant business is not for me. I mean, it's like the most grueling work you can imagine. No time to even think about artwork. So it was like after 2 years, I said, "Hell with this! I cannot do this because I can't even think about art."
Right.
You know, and the restaurant was a success. I mean, it was going over pretty good. And then the relationship fell apart, and I thought, "Oh God, what am I doing?" And so I moved back to Dallas, thinking, "Okay, I'll just start my career right back up where I left off." Well, that's a joke. I get back to Dallas and I see the few people I know, and I said, "What's going on?" And all this stuff was happening. I go, "Great," And so I went to a person I sort of knew, the director of DW Co-op, and she was at some other gallery then, and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" She goes, "Hi," and she didn't remember me from Adam, and I said, "Well, I'm back, and I just seen what's going on." And she said, "Here," I said, "I'm Tom Orr," and she goes, "Okay, great. Well, And so immediately I realized, you've left whatever you had 3 years ago. Now you're back. You're going to have to totally start over.
Wow.
And I went, "Oh my God, okay." So that's when it really got going for me, because then I realized I have to start over. So I had to get like a job that paid enough money where I didn't have to work 3 jobs and do all this stuff. So I started working for a display company as a carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to tell you one thing about me being a carpenter. I was okay, but I was certainly no skilled guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I get a job working for a big display house. So we're making these enormous fancy things. And that allowed me to learn all this stuff on the job that I really needed to know for my art career. It was kind of a nice thing,
Right.
I did that. Frances and I got together at that point. We'd known each other, but we hadn't, been together. And that's when things really started going, And I think it's because I finally realized, and not that all those years were wasted, but I thought, man, if you're going to do this, do it. Don't just wave your hands and go, "Oh, I can't do this because I don't have enough money." Meh. So, like I said, I got a fairly high-paying job and building things, and spent the rest of my time trying to make art that might maybe attract someone to it,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe still have some of those shadows and reflections and that kind of stuff, but maybe something that might last longer than a week, or a month.
Right.
And that was, since I did have some better building techniques at that point, I thought, you're smart enough, you can do this, you can make something that makes that reflection over there that you could attach, that you could leave there. It'll do that all the time, not just something you crumpled up,
Mm-hmm.
So that made me start thinking more. And then getting together with Frances, she was real serious and teaching. Well, she wasn't. Yeah, she was still teaching then, and things just started developing at that point,
Mm-hmm.
And I know you asked Frances about her first public art piece,
Mm-hmm.
and all these things didn't happen like this. I'm jumping ahead and back a little bit, but one of the big things that happened for me after I got back from all this cooking and stuff, and Frances saw this thing about a show in Japan where you could send them an image, and it was an outdoor sculpture park, and you send them one image and $200 entry fee. And I went, good God, this is like in '93 or something, and it was a lot of dough just to send for one image. She said, "You should do this." 'Cause I just made this model of a thing that looked like a boat, and it was kind of done with straight lines, and I thought it was pretty ingenious, And
Was that the wooden one? Or?
Well, I did a wooden boat first, and then I did the great big gigantic one in Japan, out of steel.
Wow.
But that was I had a little maquette, which was I looked at that maquette, it's a piece of junk, but anyway, I sent that in a diagram, and I wasn't really sure how to draw this thing, but I gave it a shot, and $200, and mailed it off to Japan, and I thought, well, that's the end of that,
Right.
And sure enough, I get shortlisted for this pretty big sculpture show in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And shortlisted mean you would build they gave us, I think, $1,000 to build a model. I think it was $1,000 to build a model and a proposal for a piece that would be in this outdoor sculpture park, And I thought, well, this is pretty cool,
Right.
And I like Japan. I'd never been there, but I'd always been fascinated by Japan since I was a kid. And so, this would be great. And make a long story short, I did, through these skills I developed, I did build a kind of wonderful model, and I got it. I was accepted. I think there's something like 30 artists from all over the world. And at the time, Japan had a ton of money, so what they would do is they'd fabricate your piece. They'd give you like $50,000 to fabricate a piece.
Right.
And it was like, I think it was 50. Frances have to tell you, either 50 or 30, but at the time it was a ton of money. and they'd fabricate the piece, they'd ship it over, and then they'd fly you over business, 2 people business for this opening. I went, God, this is great.
Wow.
And the great part about this was I had so many job things that sort of worked and worked great or didn't work. I knew kind of that there's ups and downs. So when I went into this, I thought, this isn't going to be an easy thing to do, because I didn't know any fabricators that could do this stuff and anything. Well, anyway, it did work fairly smooth, and I don't want her head to swell up over here, my wife, but at that point she was saying, well, you need to do this, and she could do all this paperwork, and I think this might have even been when computers were just getting into businesses, so she was up on top of all that, and I was like, if I'd had to do all that and make these models and try to figure all this stuff out, I would have never done it,
Right.
Well, it did work out. They fabricated it. It was a wonderful piece. It's a permanent piece at this art park. We went over to Japan and had this great time and met all these Japanese artists who we're real friendly with today, a lot of them, and now we've been back to Japan so many times. That was another changing part of my career. And it was from a lot of hard work on my part and Frances's work that this thing happened. And I got another one right after that. And it was difficult, but it was sort of like I realized you can do these things. You can have other people build these gigantic things that you don't know how to do.
Right.
And you don't have time to learn or the money to buy all the equipment. You can work with them and they can do these things. And that was a big turning point for both of us, I think.
Sure. Did any of that interaction with Japan and their culture, did it wind up coming back and influencing your work in any way? Did you see?
Well, a lot of time my work, you've seen what I do, and it's fairly clean lines and sort of simplicity is very important, and I think I always had some sort of influence from Asian work that I'd looked at early as a child and early in my life. I don't know how much it's influenced my work, but I continue to be interested in pretty much all things Asian and Japanese. We did this opera in Dallas, that's another story. But in later years, and going to Japan a lot, we've gone to theater and stuff in Japan, kabuki to start off with, because that's what every tourist goes to see. But one time I remember thinking, why in the world am I so interested in Japan and Japanese things and Asian things? And I think it's from my childhood. My folks had some sort of furniture aesthetic that was kind of along those lines, and I was also born August 6th, which is the anniversary of the Hiroshima bombing.
Oh, wow.
So I've always been reminded of how bad that is and how bad countries can be to each other.
Yeah.
But I remember going to theater and seeing things, and I remember about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I thought, why have you always been interested in what is going on? So I started trying to read Japanese history and all this. I'm going, I'll never learn anything about this. And so I thought, well, kabuki theater, that was kind of interesting with the colors and this stuff, and very Japanese kind of. And I start reading about that, and I forget where I read it, but in some book I read that kabuki is like a Broadway play. It's for the masses. It's made to entertain and blah, blah, blah. What you really need to look into is no theater, which is more like a serious off-Broadway play or a serious opera, and it's something that you can actually study, and it is entertainment, but it's something you study. I thought, ooh, as an artist, that sounds even better.
Right.
So I started looking into that. Now I'm very interested in that, and it is the most complicated thing in the world. But this last trip to Japan, we did get to go to 4 plays, and it was just tremendous.
Sure.
And if you don't know much about it, look it up, because it is. As an artist, I think it just says so much about everything, about music, visuals, light, shadow, history. It's all there, and it's, even if you can't speak the language, it's worth feeling that whole thing you get from no theater. Anyway, I kind of went off on a side thing.
No, that's fine. But it was a question about Japanese aesthetic. Maybe maybe you had a natural propensity to that aesthetic to begin with.
I think
and
I
that may
did,
have been the reason they were drawn to your work.
That's what everybody says. Well, of course you got in this show in Japan because look at your work. Well, if you look at a lot of Japanese art, I mean, especially nowadays, it's gone away from the clean kind of thing we think about to more cartoony pop culture kind of things, which is great. I mean, things change,
right.
but I think I always had that feeling for that. This no theater thing is just an extra attraction that I got. Plus, our travels to Japan and dealing with our friends in Japan, that's been like a really valuable thing for both of us because, just knowing artists in different countries is sort of invaluable. I mean, because we all deal with exactly the same thing. Exactly.
Right.
You know, no one ever has enough money. No one ever has enough shows. But this is all you want to do.
Right. Right.
Of course, we all want to go to Japan. They all want to come here.
Right. So that commission was pretty big for you.
That was the first big commission. I think it was $30,000 now. I can't remember, but
yeah,
like that.
You haven't slowed down with public commissions. I mean, that's something that really kind of keeps you busy.
It does keep you busy, and I got a couple of little stories about that. My brother one time said, my brother's always had a great job. He was a math teacher for a while. He was a school administrator for a while. His wife's been a counselor, and they're retired now. They're doing fine. But even though I've known him all my life, this money thing always comes up. He goes, he said, you got that in Japan? He said, and you just got this thing for this blah, 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 blah. So that's $100,000. That's this. He said, man, you get 3 or 4 of those a year, you're set. And I went, I get one of those every 7 years. What are you talking about? I mean, it's like, that's the deal. I mean, on the surface, it looks like we're constantly busy with these gigantic things because they take so long. And a lot of times they do pay money, a lot of money or some money, and that's how we get by. But, it takes 2 or 3 years on these things, and it's like constant work.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're seeing my mouth going to do this. And one other thing, I say this, I think this is funny. And I think everybody should think this is funny. And the joke is, I've got some good news and bad news. Good news is I got the commission. Bad news is I got the commission.
Right.
I think that's hilarious because, you're so overjoyed to get these things. And then things always can go wrong.
Yeah.
You can always fix them. But it's like you get this, you're so happy. And then it's like, oh my God. 9 times out of 10, and maybe 99% of the time, you can pull it off. You can pull it off. That's the wrong word. You can make it happen.
But it's a learning process because it's like, you don't, when you start, you're not really sure how you're gonna, pull it off. But you figure out, okay, this is how people do this.
You basically have to find the best people you can possibly find. Not the most expensive sometimes, but the best people you can find to do the stuff that you have no idea how to do, or the stuff that you know how to do that they can do much better.
Right.
You get those people around you. First of all, you get this confidence thing going where, they're not going to let everybody fail here, and it can be done. If you get way ahead of yourself and go, oh great, I just got something for $1 million. Great, I'm a millionaire. You're an idiot, man, because 9 times out of 10. Or 75% of the time, you're going to have to pay out the nose for something that you had no idea was going to cost that much money.
Right.
So you really, it can really shrink down. And again, it's not about the money. That's not why we do these things. We try to make a living, and we try to make enough where we can continue making artwork. It's not to be billionaires or the most important person. But you can't constantly lose money on them. You have to make some profit, and we've been very fortunate through Frances's handling of things and our being pretty not stingy, but frugal with the way we do things, but not frugal when it comes down to if you really have to have something, we'll spend what it takes.
Right.
But we're not going to throw money away on something that's idiotic. to make us feel better.
Right.
Oh, solve that tomorrow. We'll give a bunch of money that it'll be done. Well, no, maybe you think about it for an extra month and then it's done right and everybody's happier, you know. That's the kind of stuff you deal with constantly. And I think my wife might have brought this up to you at one point. We really just want to be in the studio working all day on work.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with these big things, sometimes it keeps you from doing that. That's bothers the wrong word. I mean, we're doing what we love to do, but we would like to be in the studio as much as possible thinking about our work.
Right. The intrinsic reward for you, is it making something that you look at and you personally say, I love this piece, or is it knowing that someone else is going to have a unique emotional experience with your work? Or do you think about, the legacy of your work and 40, 50 years from now, it still being here affecting people?
I think it's all those. Every one of those things you said is what I would want to happen with the piece. It's something. Okay, something you've developed from model stage or idea stage, and then you finally get to stand in front of it. Boy, that is the best feeling in the world. To know that someone else can stand in front of that and either have exactly the same feeling you have, or maybe some other feeling that I don't have. They may hate it, but it's a feeling, and in other words, to connect to someone else. That's so important too. And then the legacy part, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to be like in 50 years. I know when I was a kid and I saw things that were done from artists in the past, it turned me on. I mean, that those kind of things out really, really, really helped my career, seeing work by artists from the past. Robert Irwin had these two great pieces, those disc pieces, at the RISD Museum, and I don't know if it's the same ones that the Wachowskis have at their house, but he had two of them at the RISD Museum, and I can remember as a student looking at those things going, that's the most intelligent thing and the simplest thing and the most beautiful thing I think I've ever seen. It was shadows.
He's still making work.
I know he is, and it's like
in his mid-90s.
So that's, so the legacy is very important too. You get this problem, especially for outdoor pieces and stuff, if people will take care of them as they should, which is very, very important, and you can only trust that they will. Right. And when we make these things, we make them to last. We make them to where people should follow a way to maintain them. If they choose not to, at some point it's out of our hands, but you hope they would,
So the Wildlife Water Theater, it didn't survive.
No.
And so how do you feel about that?
Well, it's funny. Frances and I did that together as a total collaboration, and I saw it in one way, she saw it in a different way, but collaborated together, and it worked out as a pretty tremendous piece, which a lot of people loved, I got to tell you. And we spent about a year going around to public meetings, not trying to sell this. They'd already said, we want you to do this. But to assure people that this wouldn't damage the ecology, wouldn't have any impact on nature, really. It's a visual thing at the lake. Now, we found out later, some people even thought that was too much, that there should be nothing at the lake, like artwork. Well, it was a surprise to us, because that's why they hired us, Right. It was unfortunate in that we put everything we had into that. We didn't lose money doing this thing, but we didn't make much at all. And again, that's not the point. We did something we thought was right for the community. We didn't get.
And it's part of your community because you live near.
We live close, right. And we. Again, we didn't say, come on, give us a bunch of money, we'll make something and we'll go somewhere else. We maintained it ourselves for 5 years. We only were supposed to do it for 2 years. We did it for 5. There's a picture of us there on the wall in our wetsuits. We look like idiots, but we did that, wiped the bird crap off of them twice a year and stuff. But there was an unfortunate deal that happened with the economy in the city of Dallas, and the funds for maintaining art. It wasn't just ours, it was all the artwork. Couldn't be done. So it fell into disrepair. And, I thought of this just the other day. That swimming dock that's been out there with those light poles has been there since the 40s. And those poles are all cockeyed and everything, and the swimming platform was loaded with crap and beat up. No one ever complained about that. We get the art piece out there. I don't know what happened, but it upset a lot of the homeowners around the area. Must not have been the same homeowners that were so convinced that they wanted us to do this thing,
Right.
But they finally got it taken down, and that was a sad day for us in that the piece is gone. Mm-hmm. Sad for people who really loved it, even if it wasn't. I mean, there was some rusted spots and things were crooked, but Jeremy Strick didn't seem to think so at the National Museum. He thought it was fine and should be maybe, should be there forever,
Right.
But it happened, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the city because it doesn't make the city look so good that they would kind of do something like that. I don't know. I shouldn't say that about the city. They hired us to do it, and they did the best they could do. But it's a shame it happened. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to blame anyone for it happening. And this may just be me personally. I don't know. And I don't know. Frances and I, we've talked about this, but my take on it too is if people are really that upset by it, mm-hmm. do you really want something out there that's just going to make people ill? I mean, of course that's an exaggeration, but it's like, I mean, some people were really upset by this thing and just said it's ruining the lake and all that. And the equal number of people loved it, I guess. Right. But I mean, it's a tough call. It's a real tough call.
If the materials had been different, if there hadn't been light, if it would have seemed more organic, is there a way that those people would have? Is there any chance that those people could have been happy? Are there just some people that are going to be?
Well, here's the problem.
Sticks in the mud regardless.
We did.
It's funny I say stick in the mud. That's a really bad pun.
We used the technology of the times, which was like 1998 or 99 or something.
Right.
So the lights were hand done by by Frances's brother, and best you could get at the time, the best wiring you could get at the time. We bolted onto the concrete under, whatever you call it, the part underneath the bath area that was concreted in the 20s or 30s. We bolted into that. We did everything, hired underwater divers to do all this stuff. We did everything we thought would make this thing last. And of course, things happened with the concrete we weren't aware of. Things happened with the lighting we weren't aware of. The being in the water caused some problems.
Right.
Maybe if the budget had been bigger in the beginning, I don't know. Maybe if there had been more budget to maintain it more over the years, it might have lasted. I don't know. It's a tough call, Right. Kind of the way we felt at the end was maybe just let it be there. Whatever happens. If it gets dangerous, then by all means take something away. But if something, instead of being white, is now kind of mossy green at some part, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what happens at a lake,
Right.
But that some people don't think that. We thought differently. But again, it's over and done, and we'll see what happens next. Sorry it happened. I'm glad we did it. I'm glad we did the piece, but I'm sorry that had to happen.
Right. So that experience you had in with the display company, did your stuff start getting bigger after that? Like, did that help you kind of get a sense of larger scale?
I think it might have. And this is going back. This is let's see, was that before Japan? That was before Japan too. Yeah. Things started getting bigger. As a matter of fact, working for this display company, they used to have a bunch of mini warehouses over off of Industrial, and like. A couple of them were vacant, so I just took that over one time and did a piece in there and photographed it, and then later did it at 500X as a reunion show.
That's funny.
So I borrowed one of their places.
I saw one of your pieces. I think it was a floating mountain.
Oh yeah.
It looked like
it was big.
Yeah, it looked big, and it looked like that wasn't built in a day. I mean, that was.
That's a good story too. That was Frances and I did a show at University of Texas at Arlington, and she had one side of the gallery and I had the other, and they were pretty big. I guess 60 feet wide or something. We had just gotten back from Japan, and I remember on the train we'd seen Mount Fuji, and it's like this great thing floating in midair. So I thought, ooh, I think I'll build a floating mountain, And I thought, how do you do that? And I had done some pieces earlier where I took that concrete wire, which you could buy huge sheets, like I think they were 8 feet by 20. I think you could get, or 8 by 20, real cheap, like $6. And so I thought, man, you could. And I'd done a piece where I did them in a circle and then kind of took sticks and made something in the midst of it, so it looked like it was kind of floating. You know, small scale, you really see the wire a lot, and you got to put a lot of things in there to make it convincing. So I thought, well, I'll just do it huge. You know, why not?
Right.
And so I thought I'll build a floating mountain, and the idea was I made this kind of ingenious thing of wire that I hung from the ceiling and then shot to the floor and connected together. So I had like a framework, and I thought all I got to do is make like a topographical map.
Yeah.
And make a circle here with these sticks and wire them on.
Right.
And then and I had a drawing of a mountain, so and you just keep going up, you know, and it'll make a mountain. And so I got about 3/4 of the way done and looked at it, and it looked like nothing. You could get no idea of the form. It just looked like a bunch of kind of wiggly circles in space.
Right.
I thought, oh man, you know, what am I going to do? And then I realized, well, you take another piece and connect each one of those lines together this way and then this way.
Right.
And that'll make the form, and that'll fill it out. And I thought, you know, why didn't you think of that beforehand? It took like 3 times as long to build as I thought, and right in the middle of it,
Did it start getting heavy? Did you ever start worrying about?
No, it didn't get heavy because I used these small sticks, and since it was spread out,
it was
the whole thing weighed a lot, but no, it all kind of supported itself.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't figure this out as an engineer. I just kind of did it because I thought it would work, and it did. And I get all the way to the top, and I look, it's a mountain. It was amazing to me.
Right.
Know? And plus, you weren't supposed to get inside of it, but you could slip underneath there and walk around in there, and it was like you're inside this gigantic mountainous shape. It was pretty cool. In the midst of building this too, they had a huge ice storm. I was right in the middle of it, and I couldn't get home one night, so I had to spend the night there and then come in, and I actually finished it the next day. But
did you sleep under the mountain?
No, I stayed in a motel. But yeah, that was a and then I did another piece. Frances did one at the Irving Art Center on one side of the room, and I did one on the other. It was the same concept, and these were even taller. They were like, I think maybe close to 25 feet tall, maybe 30. And it was like an iceberg shape. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you saw the bottom and then the top of an iceberg, and that was an interesting one because it went
up kind of conical, but then it had kind of a mountain shape
on the
top. Towards the top.
And then the bottom was kind of the same thing. Yeah. And I did 3 of them in this room, different shapes, and I studied icebergs, you know, and that was an interesting one, putting it up because it worked like a dream. I had a lift, and I built the whole thing. And then I, of course, took all the wood off, taking it down. And then when it came to taking it down, I realized there's no way to really take this thing down because I built it this way. And if you take this top piece down, because I built it like this, and I kind of supported it as I built it up, if you cut the top loose to take it down, that's holding the whole thing up, you know?
Right.
So I basically had to sort of destroy it, taking it down, which was another big lesson. I should have planned it, because it actually was not very safe either.
Well, you know, it reminds me of Andy Goldsworthy. It's similar to the types of materials that he uses, and, you know, those things, they're just kind of, they're site-specific, and they're not made to be taken apart. No. Other than by nature, which is like part of, you know, his whole mantra, right?
It's funny you should mention that mountain too, because that was a good. I love that piece, and it only exists in. I think I've got some of the wire back there and some of the wood, but only in photos, you know.
Right. And so, but it's not the last mountain you've made.
No.
I mean, you've so you on the studio tour you were giving me, you were showing me the maquette for mountains down at Sam Houston.
Sam Houston State, yeah, that was a piece at this new building at Sam Houston State. And Frances did a piece in the lobby there, and those worked out great. And it's interesting about those mountains because those mountains came from that. I don't know if you've seen my work where I've done those waterfalls.
Waterfalls, right?
And I used to do these waterfall
spillway and
and the original one was striped wall, striped floor, and then these rods bent like this uniformly, but you know, changing the bend as you change the top curve, and it makes them more apparent like falling water, you know.
Right.
I did several of those. I even did one out of steel, kind of the same way with the front and the back,
Right.
you know. And then one day I was thinking about trying to get in another show in Japan, so I thought, man, you know, you can't really put a sheet of something behind something because then you got a front and a back. So if you're making
Right.
a sculpture, you need to be able to walk around it like this. And I realized if you make a hoop like this, you do have a front and a back. And so I was able to make this thing, kind of like freestanding waterfall image thing, you know,
Right.
which worked out great. Very successful in this show in Japan, except they didn't buy it. So you saw it in the parking lot sitting out here. That's it. But anyway, that led me, because I thought, if I can do that, why can't you make a mountainous form like that
Right.
and bend these and kind of intuitively kind of shape it like a mountain, you know? I mean, I guess, of course, you could go to a computer and take any mountain and draw that thing and then bend them to each. But, you know, that kind of stuff's a little hard for me to learn right now. So I thought, well, let's do it by hand. And so I've actually came up with the design for those mountains 5 or 6 years ago, and there was just never a place to do it or the money, and this thing happened to come around. It was a real nice commission, I have to tell you. It worked out good.
That's awesome.
You know? But it's something that, and it changed a little bit because I had to make like a door on there that not a door, but an opening where you could actually go inside of it, which kind of worked better, I think, than the original ones. So
Sure. And so, you know, as I was mentioning, I was walking around earlier, you know, those pieces that have the striped background. You know, when I saw the images online, at first, you know, I wasn't sure the purpose. But then I started thinking about, okay, if I were moving past this would be a lot like a lenticular animation.
yep, exactly
right?
what it is. Yep.
And I'm like, this thing's going to be really humming and resonating, and you're really going to get a sense of movement, even though it's perfectly static.
Right.
And so when did you? I assume, I assume that was probably also part of your thought. And like, at what point did you start realizing that you wanted to use those vertical stripes? And don't say first grade. Yeah.
Well, okay, preschool. No, I explained that thing about the Venetian blinds, but you know,
Right.
I'm trying to find something in here that does that. That fan over there,
right,
that's doing it right
exactly.
there. That still fascinates me. I love looking at it. You know, back in the op art days,
Yeah.
they took that, did so much of it to a fault. I mean, you buy a
Right.
damn shopping bag and it looks like that, and everything was psychedelic, you know, patterns like that. Kind of took all the interest out of it for me, but I still have always been fascinated by that. I kind of wasn't thinking about it as much as artwork until I realized if you took that same thing happening there and don't make everything do that, but make something do that along with something else, you know?
Right.
Then it gets interesting because you've got this thing over here that's kind of buzzing and moving on its own, and you can't figure it out. And then next to it is just some stripes. I mean, it's almost like
Right.
a 3D, 2D thing that's moving, and I'm not doing anything, you know? I
Right.
mean, it's like kind of the perfect painting, sculpture, movement in your artwork kind of piece you can get, and it's basically line over line.
Right.
You know? It's over the years I've tried to really make it less and less and less. Where I just did a piece recently. It's very small. It's a striped panel, and all it has is a kind of a piece of wire looped around it, and it does the same thing, but it's just one tiny wire that does that. So to me, that is much more. It's just as beautiful as a whole waterfall looking thing. Just that one wire mysteriously changing. I think on my that Instagram page I told you about, that piece is on there. In fact, it was in that show Barry had in his office at the last show I was in. The last show I was in at Barry's. I'm with Barry Whistler Gallery.
Right.
And he's been really good to me over the years by allowing me to do these things in his gallery that's, you know, like the last show I did at his old gallery was just two pieces, one in one room, one in the other, a rug piece and a piece that stood in the middle of the room that kind of balanced on a beam.
Right.
I mean, they were interesting pieces, but he let me take up the whole gallery with those two pieces. Fantastic of him to do that. This last show I was in, he had a show up front, and then he has a new wall, a 12-foot by 12-foot wall he's real proud of, and in the back area there. And so he was in the studio one day, and you saw this piece out there.
Yeah.
He said, I was working on something like a striped wall with, I mean, not found objects, but basically things from the studio that I'd kind of made that weren't really anything, but I knew they would kind of get going on this striped surface. So I kind of leaned them at different angles and crossed them and did things. And
Right.
so Barry walks in and goes, is that a piece? And I said, well, it could be. And he goes, well, let's do this. And so again, he let me put this one piece in the back room, just that, in the whole back half of the gallery.
Right.
And it looks pretty good in my space, but in his space, it just looked incredible. I mean, it's kind of like the best place you could put this piece, and the lighting was right and all that. So anyway, it worked out good, you know.
Yeah.
Good for Barry. I gotta tell you that, and good for me.
Right. And so,
but those things I think I'll continue to do. I mean, again, I like make them as really simple as possible, but sort of real concentrated in areas. You know, it changes. I don't know, but
I know you guys are, work on like the big public art, but do you think about doing smaller pieces that move faster out the door?
Yeah. Frances and I talk about that a lot, you know. We do like the freedom to do whatever we want to do, especially in gallery situations. So she's been allowed that over the years, and so have I with different galleries, to do what we want to do. Even if they don't sell, they still allow these things to happen, which again, you got to praise those gallery owners, because, you know, they're in the business to show wonderful art.
Right.
To stay in business, they need to sell wonderful art. So, you know, to take a whole space and give it to an artist that just as for an installation is good. We both like doing that, but we both know we need to make smaller work, and we have made smaller work over the years. It's something, I don't know, it seems like the older we get, it might be a wise thing to do too, because these things might be a little easier to transport and work on, and I've actually got a bunch of stuff started back here that I make models all the time, and I'm not going to make models for sale. I'm just not going to for sale. I'm just not going to do that. But I can make small things that do what these big things do. As of yet, I haven't figured out how to do them where it pleases me.
Right.
You know?
Right.
I mean, and I see stuff all the time. I go, God, that's sort of what I want to be doing. I mean, the way that person did that, if I could just, and I need to concentrate on that, and I know they'll come. It's just you have to think about it more and more and more, and that's something I would like to strive for, making things that I could set on that table there that would not do exactly what these big things do here, but you get that same feeling from it, you know. And it's not that it's a miniature of that big thing. This is actually a real piece, but it happens to be smaller.
Sure.
But look what the hell it's doing, you know.
Yeah. If somebody wanted to find you, where are you out there?
Okay, it's tomorr.net is the website.
Okay.
BarryWhistler.com. He's got a nice website. I think this is still he's got a nice website, and he used to have some videos of me talking about stuff, which is, take it one way, it's either extremely funny or extremely informative. I don't know, but they're good. And Barry Whistler Gallery, his website, and then we both just started this Instagram thing. So Instagram, what is it? The at Tom Orr Art.
Right. Right on. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you for doing this. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Now, the news. Artists usually believe that their work is their legacy. Long after they die, the work will still be there to carry on. However, things have a way of changing, and sometimes artwork has a way of just disappearing. For example, Jens Gauscha's sculpture Pillar of Shame, which was placed at the University of Hong Kong in 1997, as a memorial to those killed in the 1989 Tiananmen crackdown. As we all know, the political climate in Hong Kong has changed. In October, the civil rights organization that originally commissioned Gilshott's work received a letter from the university asking them to remove it. Since then, the organization was forcefully dissolved, along with other civil groups and unions, in a recent government crackdown. Fearing the demolition of the artwork, the artist tried to reach out to the university to arrange a way to get the sculpture back, but the university would not return his calls. Then last week, in the dark of early morning hours, the sculpture was disassembled and carted away. Where it is now is anyone's guess, but it's very likely it won't be seen again. The art world lost a genuinely good guy this week with the passing of Wayne Thiebaud. Thiebaud was the godfather of West Coast realism, respected by many and disparaged by none. Thiebaud grew up in Southern California and spent time in the 1st Motion Picture Unit of the Army Air Corps during World War II. After the war, he enrolled at San Jose State, before later transferring to Sacramento State, where he obtained his bachelor's and master's. It was in this artistic hotbed of Sacramento that Thiebaud planted roots, first taking a teaching job at his alma mater before a 30-year stint at nearby UC Davis. Thiebaud retired from teaching in 1991 but maintained a professor emeritus title there and would guest lecture at the university. In 1961, Thiebaud caught the eye of legendary art dealer Alan Stone. That relationship started opening doors. Thiebaud had been creating a series of paintings of food that were both appealing and contemporary. In 1962, he was included in a groundbreaking show at SF MoMA called New Painting of Common Objects, that also included the likes of Roy Lichtenstein and Andy Warhol, and signaled the beginning of the pop art era. His subjects ranged from food to landscapes to portraits, but the paintings always communicated a certain quintessential Americana. It's always amazing what long, full lives artists live. I believe it's because painting is something that is doable and provides purpose well into advanced age. On the act of painting, Thiebaud had commented, quote, "It has never ceased to thrill and amaze me, the magic of what happens when you pull one bit of paint next to another. I wake up every morning and paint. I'll be damned, but I just can't stop." Well, after 101 years, the painting has stopped. It seems like 2021 was a year of newly discovered antiquities. A Roman mosaic floor was uncovered in the English countryside, and an original Albert Dürer ink drawing was purchased at an estate sale for a price less than a family of 4 dining at Chipotle. This week, there is more news about a painting attributed to Jose Ribera that was pulled from auction in April. This week, it was granted protected status by the Spanish government, while additional research is done to verify whether the small painting is actually a Caravaggio. The status also allows time for the Spanish government to decide whether they want to purchase the artwork in order to keep it in Spain. The painting was originally scheduled to be auctioned in April of this year with a pre-auction estimate of €1,500, but was pulled from auction by the family who was selling it when they started receiving private party offers in the 500,000 to €3 million range. That caused the family to pull the item from auction while they figured out exactly what they had. It seems that photos of the item had started floating around to experts who had immediately attributed the work to Caravaggio. One such scholar pinned the painting to an art contest submission by Caravaggio in the year preceding the murder that led to his exile from Italy. It's thought that in that time after the murder, the painting may have been reattributed in order to avoid the embarrassment of owning a painting produced by a murderer. Another theory about the lost attribution and move to Spain connects the organizer of that art contest, whose cousin became the papal ambassador to Madrid in 1623. Either way, the painting eventually wound up in the collection of Antonio Perez de Castro, founder of Madrid's IADE Design School, and the artist Mercedes Mendez Attard. It was upon their passing that their children were presented with the shock that the small painting that they had lived with their entire childhood may be a lost treasure. Practically all Caravaggios are owned by institutions, so the prospect of one coming to auction is sure to create some auction theatrics. Now we just have to wait for the nation of Spain to decide if they can pony up the funds to add the piece to the collection of the Prado, or if a private collector will be able to return the piece to Italy. Either way, that pre-auction estimate has gone from €1,500 to something in the neighborhood of 50 million. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to Art Sense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, and while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. If you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read a transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.